Okay, so you know how some texts, some books really just kind of grab you and won't let go, like they're full of these mysteries and layers you just want to peel back? Well, today we're tackling one of those, a book that's really central, really important in the King James Version, and one that a lot of you have specifically asked us to unpack.
Absolutely. And with a book as dense and complex as this one, you can't just jump in without a map, right?
Right.
It's like exploring a totally new landscape. That's where our source material comes in. It lays out all the essentials, the title, the possible authors, the key themes, how it's structured. Our job is to point out the most fascinating parts, the stuff that'll make you go, whoa, I never thought of it that way.
So let's get specific. Our deep dive today is into the book of Revelation, the King James Version.
Right.
And just glancing at this summary, we've got our work cut out for us.
We do.
Title, authorship, the historical context, what it was trying to say to its original audience, the way it's written, which is, well, let's just say unique. Some really interesting patterns that pop up, how people have interpreted it over time, and even a detailed breakdown of what's in each chapter.
Hurry the journey ahead.
It is, but every good journey starts with a solid first step. So basics first. The title, Book of Revelation, KJV. Pretty straightforward, but it tells us we're about to encounter something that's going to be revealed. And our summary, that's our trusty guidebook, by the way, gives us a clear path through all this material.
It does.
Okay, so on to the big question. Who wrote this dramatic, visually intense book? The writer calls himself John. That's it, just John. But tradition, going way back to early church figures like Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, says this is John the Apostle, one of Jesus' closest followers.
Yep, the son of Zebedee. We read about him in the Gospel of Matthew.
Exactly. So what makes this traditional view of the author so convincing?
Well, think about John the Apostle for a second. He was Jewish, knew the Hebrew Bible inside and out, a leader in the early church, someone those 7 churches in Asia Minor would have known and listened to, and he believed, really believed, that Christianity was going to win in the end.
Right, so he has the authority, the background to deliver this kind of prophetic message.
Exactly.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? There's often more to the story with these ancient texts. Our summary mentions a bishop named Dionysius back in the 3rd century. He starts asking some tough questions.
He did?
He looks at the language, the writing style, even the thought process behind Revelation, and compares it to other stuff we think John wrote, like his gospel. And he sees some pretty big differences.
Huge differences.
So what was his main point?
Basically, he said the differences are so big that maybe it wasn't written by the Apostle John. He throws out another possibility, John the Presbyter, who's mentioned in other early Christian writings.
Interesting. And this isn't just some fringe theory, is it? A lot of scholars today agree with Dionysius. They see those same inconsistencies in style and theme.
They do, and it makes you wonder, if it wasn't the Apostle, who was it? And how does that change our understanding of the book?
So 2 strong contenders, both with good arguments. Where does the evidence lead? Our summary says, even though there's a good case for a different author based on the text itself, the early church leaders, the historical documents, they mostly point to John the Apostle. It's like 2 different types of evidence telling slightly different stories. Why is that early testimony so important?
Because those people were closer to the events, had firsthand knowledge of the early church. Their accounts, if they're consistent and widespread, carry a lot of weight. Think of it like this. If you want to know what your great-grandparents were really like, who would you ask?
Someone who actually knew them.
Exactly. You wouldn't just rely on a letter they wrote. You'd want to talk to their friends, their children.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got this open question about authorship, but let's move on to when this book was likely written. Our summary puts it right in the middle of some really tough times for early Christians. Intense persecution.
Really intense.
And that lines up with the themes in Revelation, right? Struggling to stay faithful, enduring suffering. What were the main periods of persecution that scholars usually consider?
2 big ones. The end of Nero's reign in the 60s AD, and then the end of Domitian's reign in the 90s AD. Both times, Roman authorities really clamped down on Christians.
And most scholars seem to lean toward that later period, around 95 AD. During Domitian's rule. Although I noticed our summary mentions a few scholars who think it might have been earlier, during Vespasian's reign in the 70s AD. What makes the later date more likely?
Well, under Domitian, emperor worship became a much bigger deal. It went from being like a local thing to a policy enforced across the whole Roman Empire. And that fits really well with what Revelation is talking about, the pressure to abandon your faith and worship the emperor instead.
So the historical context really lines up.
Yeah, it's a much stronger match.
Makes sense. Which brings us to the reason behind the book. The occasion, as our summary calls it. This wasn't some theoretical exercise. It was written in response to a very real and growing
The
crisis.
crisis of faith.
Exactly. The Romans were saying the emperor was divine and had to be worshipped, but for Christians, Jesus was Lord, the one true God.
Mm.
How did Revelation address this impossible situation?
Head on. There are specific warnings to the church in Smyrna about imprisonment and suffering, promises of protection during a time of trial to the church in Philadelphia, even mentions of people like Antipas who'd been martyred for their faith. This wasn't some abstract theological debate. It was about real people facing real consequences for refusing to worship the emperor.
It was life or death.
Absolutely.
And John himself wasn't just some detached observer, right? He was exiled to Patmos, probably a Roman penal colony, for preaching Christianity.
Can you imagine?
No, I can't. That personal experience of suffering must have really shaped the book.
Totally. Being punished for his beliefs gave John this incredibly powerful perspective. Plus, our summary points out something else. There was also a struggle within the church itself. Some Christians were tempted to compromise, to find some way to accommodate emperor worship. Revelation is this urgent plea, this powerful call to resist that compromise and stay true to Christ.
So the purpose of the book becomes really clear. It wasn't just about these crazy symbolic visions. It was about encouraging the faithful, reminding them that even though things looked bleak, God was ultimately in control.
Exactly. John wanted to strengthen their resolve, to show them that this battle between God and Satan, this cosmic showdown, was reaching its peak.
A turning point in history.
Yes, he wanted to reassure them. God's power is greater than Rome, greater than Satan's.
So hold on, stay strong, you'll be vindicated.
Yes, and he promises them protection, vindication through Christ's return, the defeat of evil, eternal glory for those who stayed faithful. Powerful stuff.
It really is. This message of hope amidst suffering must have been incredibly powerful for those early Christians facing persecution. It speaks to a very human need, doesn't it? That yearning for hope when things seem darkest.
Absolutely. Knowing their suffering had a purpose, that it fit into God's bigger plan, would have given them immense courage. It's that timeless truth. Faith offers a perspective that goes beyond the immediate, even in the darkest times.
Okay, now let's talk about something that can be a bit jarring when you first crack open Revelation, the way it's written.
Yeah, it's unlike anything else in the Bible.
Totally. Our summary calls it apocalyptic literature.
Which is basically a fancy way of saying it's full of symbolism. It's not straightforward storytelling. Think of it like a dream or a really intense poem.
So what are some of the hallmarks of apocalyptic literature that can help us understand Revelation?
Well, it's all about these vivid images, this symbolic language, this cosmic battle between good and evil. It's meant to reveal God's perspective on events, his plan for the future, but in a way that needs interpretation, not a literal reading.
Like a coded message for those in the know.
Exactly.
And the good news is, it's not an impossible code to crack. Our summary mentions that Revelation actually gives us some clues to help us decipher the symbolism.
Right. It's not completely random.
Right, like it explains that stars represent angels, lampstands are churches. The great prostitute is actually Babylon, which most scholars think refers to Rome.
And the heavenly Jerusalem is depicted as the bride of the Lamb.
So we get these little hints within the text itself.
Yes. These clues are essential. They tell us, okay, the language is symbolic, but there is a system, a framework. And once you start recognizing those connections, you move beyond just being baffled by the weird imagery, and you can start grasping what's really being said.
It's like a key to unlock the deeper meaning.
Exactly.
Now, one thing you can't miss when you read Revelation is the constant repetition of the number 7.
Oh, yeah, it's everywhere.
52 times, according to our summary. That's got to be significant. Why is 7 so prominent?
Well, in biblical symbolism, 7 represents completeness, perfection, the fullness of God's purposes, his actions.
And the examples are everywhere, right? 7 churches, 7 spirits, 7 golden lampstands, 7 stars, 7 seals, 7 horns, and 7 eyes on the Lamb, 7 trumpets, even 7 thunders.
7 signs, 7 crowns, 7 plagues, 7 golden bowls of wrath, Babylon sitting on 7 hills, even 7 kings mentioned in connection with it.
It's like a drumbeat throughout the book. So what's the takeaway from all this?
It emphasizes the main theme. God is in control. He's sovereign over history, over the unfolding of his plan. Even the catastrophes, the judgments, they're not random. They're part of his perfect, comprehensive design for judgment and ultimately restoration. It's a reminder that even in chaos, God's purposes will prevail.
A very reassuring message.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got this rich symbolism, these intense visions, so it's probably no surprise that there are different ways to interpret what Revelation is really trying to say. Our summary mentions four main schools of thought, four different approaches. What are the main differences between them?
Right, so understanding these different interpretations is really key to appreciating the ongoing discussions about Revelation. Let's start with the preterist view. They see most of the events in Revelation as having already happened, fulfilled back in the first century.
Like the destruction of Jerusalem, the fall of the Roman Empire.
Exactly. Then you've got the historicist approach. They see Revelation as this big sweep of history from John's time all the way to the end of the world. Different symbols represent different historical events and people.
So it's like a roadmap of history.
Kind of. Then there's the futurist perspective, which is super popular today. They believe most of the prophecies in Revelation refer to events that haven't happened yet, things that'll go down just before Christ returns.
The end times.
Exactly. And finally, there's the idealist interpretation. They focus on the symbolic nature of the book, saying it represents these timeless spiritual truths about good versus evil, God's ultimate victory, without necessarily tying those symbols to specific events in history or the future.
So it's more about universal themes.
Exactly. It's like looking at the same painting through four different colored lenses. You see different things, different nuances, but the painting itself remains the same.
That's a great analogy. And, it's a relief to know you don't have to choose just one of these interpretations to get something out of Revelation.
Definitely not. The core message, hope, perseverance, God's ultimate triumph, it resonates across all these different viewpoints.
It's about the big picture, not getting bogged down in the finer points of interpretation.
Exactly. Whether you're a preterist, a futurist, or something in between, the core message remains powerful.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Author, timing, context, purpose, literary style, the significance of the number 7, and the different ways to interpret it. Now, to really understand the book, we need to look at its structure.
It's like getting a blueprint.
Exactly. Our summary gives us this really detailed outline, walks us through the main sections and the chapters they cover.
Yeah, understanding the outline helps you see the logic of John's message. It goes from this immediate situation of the churches in Asia Minor to these huge sweeping visions of cosmic conflict and ultimate resolution.
Right. So let's hit some of the key sections, just to give you a sense of how this book unfolds. It starts with an introduction in chapter 1, which sets the stage and includes John's initial greetings. Then we get this really powerful image of Jesus appearing in glory among the 7 golden lampstands, which represent the 7 churches.
And that leads directly into chapters 2 and 3, which contain those letters to each of the 7 churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Each one is unique, a mix of praise, criticism, and a call to repentance and perseverance.
Tailored to the specific challenges of each church.
Precisely.
Then, bam! The scene shifts dramatically in chapters 4 and 5. We're in heaven, in God's throne room, with this mysterious scroll sealed with 7 seals. And then we meet the Lamb, who is Christ, the only one worthy to open it.
And that's when the symbolic prophetic visions really kick in.
The story takes a huge turn.
Yes, it becomes much more symbolic.
Exactly. And what follows is God's judgment unfolding, often presented in these sets of 7. We have the breaking of the 7 seals in chapters 6 through 8. Each seal unleashing a different judgment. Then we get the 7 trumpets in chapters 8 through 11, bringing more plagues and warnings.
And then much later, we have the 7 bowls of God's wrath in chapters 15 and 16, representing the final stages of judgment.
Oh, a lot of 7s.
A lot of 7s.
Okay, and in between all these judgments, in chapters 12 through 14, we encounter all these key figures and events. There's the woman clothed with the sun, the great red dragon, the 2 beasts representing earthly powers opposed to God, and then this contrasting image of the Lamb on Mount Zion with the 144,000.
Yeah, those chapters are super symbolic, open to a lot of different interpretations.
Definitely a lot to unpack there.
Oh, yeah.
Then, as we move towards the end of the book, chapters 17 through 19 focus on Babylon, which is often seen as a symbol of worldly power and rebellion against God. We get this vivid description of her corruption, her fall, followed by celebrations in heaven.
And then the big one, Christ's triumphant return as king in chapter 19. Huge moment.
And finally, in chapters 20 through 22, we get to the ultimate resolution. Satan is bound. Christ establishes his millennial reign, which people interpret in different ways. Satan is defeated for good. There's the great white throne judgment. And then, bam, This incredible vision of the new heaven, the new earth, and the new Jerusalem.
A state of perfect harmony with God.
Perfect ending. And the book closes with words of assurance and a final benediction.
It's a powerful journey.
It really is. Stepping through that outline, you see the scope, the narrative arc of Revelation. It starts with the struggles of those early churches and ends with this ground vision of God's eternal kingdom.
It puts everything into perspective.
So let's wrap up with a quick review of what we've covered. We looked at the traditional view of John the Apostle as the author, while acknowledging other possibilities. We placed the book in the context of intense persecution, most likely around 95 AD. We saw that its main purpose was to encourage believers to stay strong in the face of emperor worship, reminding them that God wins in the end.
Right, and we talked about the book's unique literary style, the apocalyptic genre with all its symbolism, the repeated use of the number 7, representing completeness. And we touched on the 4 main approaches to interpreting this incredibly complex and fascinating book.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But remember, even though Revelation was written for a specific time and place, its core themes, the battle between good and evil, perseverance, hope for a just resolution, these are things that resonate with people across time and cultures. The language might seem strange, but the questions it grapples with, questions of faith, power, the future, those are always relevant.
Absolutely.
Always relevant. So here's a thought for you to chew on as we finish up. Given the historical context of persecution and the range of interpretations, what image, what message, what theme from Revelation speaks to you most strongly? And why do you think that particular aspect resonates with you? We encourage you to explore the book for yourself, maybe even look into those different interpretive lenses.
Dive in.
Yes, dive in. We hope this deep dive has given you a solid foundation, a framework for your own reading and exploration of this truly unique and often captivating book.
It's a journey worth taking.
It really is.